will be intersectional or it will be bullshit. Girl, did you hear about the snow?
Hi guys! How's recess? Good. I'm excited for you. I had coffee. And then more coffee. And then thought about cigarettes. But didn't have one. So I feel good. I know. It was a challenge. A lot of good stuff happening, and then we have lunch, which is always fun. So I'm super excited to come back from recess and introduce this amazing person. Oftentimes, when do you feel like you have the best job in the world? Yes. Right? I feel like I have the best job in the world too. And then I'm like, whose job would I want if I didn't have my job? And it's this next person coming to the stage. He has done so many things to make change in magnificent ways. He was the executive director of Move On. He wrote an incredible book that led to the creation of Upworthy. He co-founded Avaz. And now he's got the Good Media Group, which continues to just use technology to help gather people and make the world a better place. So I am so excited to introduce to you Eli Pariser! Knock it, sir.
Nothing can stop me. I'm all the way up.
Hi, everybody. So bad news up front. I hate to break it to you, but we're all living a lie. Some of us may be living more than one lie, but I want to focus on one in particular as social change communicators, which I think actually distorts and undergirds a lot of our work. And it's a lie that we all learn in grade school, actually. It's a lie that we can even hear in the founding document of our country. We hold these truths to be self-evident. There it is. The lie is, truths are self-evident. Or we hear it again in Oliver Wendell Holmes' famous idea of the marketplace of ideas, where the best truth rises to the top. I think it's safe to say, a year into the Trump administration, that this is not happening. The truth is not rising to the top, and instead it's being distorted, it's being stepped on, it's being watered down and distracted from. And it's a crisis. And I think Barack Obama talked about this in his farewell speech to the country when he said that our inability to agree on a set of facts is actually like a crisis for democracy, because democracy depends on an informed public that's coming together across different viewpoints and finding some kind of sense of common ground and truth together. And if we can't do that, then this whole project kind of starts to wobble. But I think if we're in a crisis, we've been distracted about what the problem is. So we've heard a lot about fake news and about Russian bots and about disinformation campaigns. And I think all of that stuff is it's creepy, it's scary, it's sexy, but it's not the problem. The problem's deeper than that. The problem is that the truth isn't loud enough. And unless we confront this problem, I don't think that we're going to actually kind of make headway. We could get rid of all that fake news and still not be where we want to be in terms of moving toward a better society. It's kind of like trying to deal with a heart attack with a Band-Aid. Wrong solution for the problem. So I want to argue that the problem, the thing that's causing this fundamentally is that the marketplace of ideas that we've all heard about, it's been rigged. The economics have changed in a way that has distorted what information gets to whom. And that if we want to build a system that makes the truth louder, we've got to address that problem. And this isn't like a bum out talk. Like, I have a theory of what we could all do together to actually address this. But first, I want to actually talk about what the problem is, because I think it's only by diagnosing it that we can kind of get to that solution. So a little bit about me. I kind of come to this from a funny point of view. I started as an organizer, became the executive director of Move On. And at Move On, we could always see, I think it's funny to be in conversations with social change communicators who say, kind of like, does media even really matter? Does it move people? And I can tell you as an organizer, yes, it does. It does. And we could see it, because we could see the response rates going up by 3x the day after something hit the New York Times front page. right? So that's actually what got me into this question in the first place. And I got interested in this problem of, OK, we can see this kind of cause and effect relationship, but what happens as we see people's attention shifting from the New York Times to the Facebook newsfeed? What's going to happen then in terms of how people are primed to take action? And so I started doing this little research project that turned into a book called The Filter Bubble, which was kind of my attempt to grapple with those problems. And then I was going around talking about the book, which is kind of this critique of social media, and people were like, you're such a downer, like, what are you really going to do about it? And I was like, OK, I got to take the bait. I'm always one for a challenge. And I started a company called Upworthy that was attempting to kind of like solve some of these problems. So I come at this from three perspectives as someone who has been an organizer, who's been a media critic, and then tried to kind of build some media properties and learn about the dynamics and the challenges with the dynamics in media. So I want to talk about sort of three dirty secrets that we have to confront in order to find the right shape of the solution. And the first secret is that we're living in a landscape where some people's attention is more valuable than others. We all kind of know there's been this enormous shift in how we communicate, but I want to take us back to the 1970s and think about the kind of economics of information then. So you're a local TV station in 1970, and you have this antenna, and it reaches a geographic area. And there's zero marginal cost to reaching more people or less people. It doesn't matter if 50 people tune in or 500, right? And your advertisers want to reach a small subset of that group of people. But in order to reach that small subset, they have to go through you. And if that small subset is going to really be interested in news, then the news goes on at 6. And on the other hand, if you're not interested in news, but you want to watch TV at 6, like, there's only one thing to watch. So it's worth saying, like, this was not a panacea, as we all know. And there were a ton of people who were completely left out of this conversation. Women, folks of color, non-straight folks, like basically everyone but like straight white dudes were not, heard in this ecosystem. It wasn't great old days. But what we saw was a kind of bell curve of political informedness. And this is from research by a guy named Marcus Pryor. But basically, because if you were really, really interested in news, you still could only watch the news every day at 6. And if you weren't interested at all, sometimes you ended up watching it anyway. You got this kind of like average of political informedness. So along comes the internet. And it's worth saying, like, what does technology do? One of the main things that technology does is make things more efficient, right? So Airbnb makes the housing market more efficient, or the bed market more efficient. Uber makes the car market, the taxi market more efficient. What market does Facebook make more efficient? Facebook makes more efficient the selling of valuable attention to advertisers, right? Emphasis on valuable. Because we're talking about the attention economy all the time, but I don't think we really grapple with this truth, which is that some people's attention is more valuable than other people's attention. And I ran a little experiment just to kind of demonstrate this on Facebook. So I actually just took this very scary article about the CDC losing funding and boosted it to two groups: rich white dudes on the coast who have college degrees, and Latino women who are lower income. And you can see, like, the rich white dudes command a 6x premium over the Latino women. So is it any surprise that there are a whole host of media entities that are going after the rich white dudes, and not a whole lot of media infrastructure that's aimed at Latino women? And meanwhile, we have this shift from a bell curve to a power curve, where you have sort of a small group of people who has gotten hyper-informed in this moment. And probably a lot of you are in this room. But it's worth remembering, like, most people do not consume very much news at all. They consume less than they did before the internet. That's crazy. And so you have kind of rising information inequality. So what sort of comes to mind is that we're seeing this kind of fabric that we depend on as a democracy eaten away. And we're starting to see the creation of these kind of narrative deserts, environments in which the ideas and the news that people need in order to be informed, engaged citizens simply aren't part of the environment. William Gibson once said that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I want to say, like, the truth is here, but it is very unevenly distributed. And because of these economics, it's getting more unevenly distributed. So the second piece is, these changes are also reshaping at the same time who we trust. And this isn't a coincidence. And I want to suggest that like we're seeing this massive crash in trust in media, but it's kind of like this, we're not understanding it correctly, because we're not understanding kind of where the trust came from in the first place. So it's worth saying, like, what we believe, mostly we believe from other people. Like, we think we know these facts, but very few of them have we objectively experienced. We know diamonds are made from coal, and we know Napoleon was short, and we know the Great Wall of China is visible from space. Except diamonds aren't mostly made from coal, and Napoleon was taller than average. And if you can see the Great Wall on this map from space, you're a better wall viewer than I am. So why do we think these things are true? We think they're true because someone smart told us they were true, and we relied on that person. That's how we come to believe what we believe is true. And we had this sort of weird 50-year period where there were these, to tell people things, you had to have access to a lot of capital to build a printing press or to build an antenna. And those people who had that access to capital decided that in order to push ideas through, you had to subscribe to a set of norms. And so we came to believe that people trusted those norms. But they didn't trust those norms. They just thought they did because that was the way that they got most of the information. And basically that we don't have faith in journalistic process. We thought we did because there were local media monopolies. And when we think about how trust works on a human level, we all kind of know intuitively that this isn't how it works. That we don't trust the person who is cold and punctilious and perfect at dotting every I over the person who cares about us, who is warm, and who has our best interests at heart. And so I think we've seen this kind of collapse in trust because, in part, media really hasn't had a lot of people's best interests at heart. It hasn't been actually like interested in taking care of us. And now there's an easier way to do it. We've all got Facebook, and we can get information through our friends. And that's actually a lot more comfortable and natural as human beings than it was to rely on these intermediaries. People talk about journalism as the immune system for democracy, right? And I think like we've got an autoimmune disorder. Like our nervous, we're eating ourselves away from the inside. And so this brings me to the third piece, which is kind of like not news to people who have been at Frank, but what we believe isn't rational. And the more of a rationalist you are, the more you have to agree with me on this point. Because there are thousands of studies that Anne and other people can tell you about how what we believe is not the function of like rationally adding up numbers. And so we know a bit about what actually people come to believe. And it's about repetition, and it's about recency, and it's about emotion, and it's about storytelling, and it's about trusted voices. And I just want to reflect on this for a minute, because if we really believe all of these things, then the shape of the solution to our truth problem is really different than the kind of media that we've had in the past. So, to recap, the economics have changed. There are these new narrative deserts. People no longer kind of trust or need traditional media for the things that they thought they needed it for. And the way people internalize ideas looks really different anyway. And so I think that the question, the challenge in front of us is like, what is the right response to this set of large-scale challenges? 50 years ago, this year, Congress created the public media system. And if you look back at the charter for the public media system, it's really pretty awesome. It is in the public interest to encourage the development of programming that involves creative risks and addresses the needs of underserved and unserved audiences, particularly children and minorities. It's like not bad. And so I think we need a new public media ecosystem for the digital age. So I want to talk about what that might look like. And to be clear, like I don't have an institution I'm building, but I think all of us together need to be thinking on a kind of scale and a shape to address this challenge. So I think we need a new ecosystem of community-focused, impact-oriented digital media channels and entities. And I think we need a network across that ecosystem that helps us learn together and helps us grow and adapt as the environment changes. And I think these entities need to look a little different from like our traditional sort of media and news gathering and even storytelling entities, because I think they need to bring together three discrete kind of skill sets. So there's this skill set of finding what is true And then there's a skill set of how do we actually get it in front of people, marketing and distribution. And then there's a skill set of like, but even if we got it in front of them, did they actually internalize it and does it change their lives and did they do something about it? And these things live very far apart. And I think this gathering, which is not a conference, is one of the few places where they're coming together. But I think we need to build institutions, entities that do this every day. So I was trying to think about sort of what populates a narrative desert. And I came up with this acronym of an oasis. And I think the first letter is actually the most important, which is that it has to be ongoing. I've been a campaigner. I've done one-off viral videos. It's all cool, but it's not enough because we actually have to be in people's lives every day if we're going to want to have the kind of scale and reach that we want. It has to be audience-centric, which means built off the needs of the audience where they are. It has to be story-based. It has to be iterative and constantly learning. And it has to have some mechanism for some self-sustaining. I'm not arguing, and in fact, I'm arguing explicitly that we can't do this through a pure market-based solution, but that building in some of the economics of what we've learned in media could actually be helpful. And I think there's a huge opportunity space here because we've seen the rise of some really powerful and exciting new experiments in ProPublica and the Marshall Project, but these things are generally focused at elites. And they're focused at changing decision makers' minds. They're not actually focused outward at changing culture, at building a more engaged public or publics. And I think that's the place where there's an enormous opportunity. So what does this look like? It's going to look different for each population because people consume media differently. There's no one-size-fits-all solution here. The National Domestic Workers Alliance is launching a new podcast called, I think, Sunshine or Sunshower, which is like the view for domestic workers. And the idea is that as you're cleaning, you've got your earbuds in, and every day you're getting in this conversation that's providing you both with a sense of how to be better in your job, but also actually connecting you to the things that are going on in the world. So that's one version of what it looks like, but it's going to look different for each different group. And in fact, probably within each narrative desert, within each demographic area, you need multiple of these things working together as an ecosystem to actually make this work. So you're probably thinking to yourself, like, this sounds awesome, but impossibly expensive. And I would argue, like, this is a real, like, this doesn't come cheap. It's probably $500 million or something as a way to get started, right? And so $500 million kind of sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But wait, is it a lot of money? Because what we're trying to do is change culture. And Coca-Cola's advertising budget is $4 billion every year. And that's one company. And $500 million is a tiny fraction of $4 billion, right? So if we're serious about this project and about the scale of the crisis and about the scale of the challenge, like, we got to find a way to do this. And the other piece is, actually, I think when we back out the math, and I'm a nerd, so like I actually did the spreadsheets to start to work on this, like, we find that actually this way of reaching people is way, way cheaper than the advertising that we spend a lot of money on. For the simple reason that if you hire 100 creatives versus putting that money into advertising, like the cost per impression is literally 100 times less. So I think the key thing here, though, is that we can't just let 1,000 flowers bloom. And that's for a very simple reason, which is that flowers don't bloom in the desert because there's no water. So if we just let the market try to take care of this, it's not going to work because the places where this is most needed are the places specifically where the economics actually are kind of the most challenging. So you might be thinking now, well, Eli, this sounds great, but I don't have $100 million to give you right now. So how can I help? I'm not asking, by the way. But well, I don't have a thing to give it to. I think this is something we all got to do together. But and I think part of the answer is we're all involved in these organizations that also play a critical role in building these new ecosystems, right? So you look at an organization like Planned Parenthood or do something, and there's probably like 100 examples in the room of organizations that already have these relationships with built-in bases that could actually kind of start to conceive of themselves as media channels as much as organizations that are moving people to activism. And it requires a different set of muscles, but I think we're starting to see some organizations really figure out how to do this. That's a big piece of the puzzle too. So if I leave you with one thought, I want to leave you with this thought, which is that I think we have to reckon with the fact that the truth is not going to distribute itself. And it needs help. It needs our help. And I don't think you would be here in this room if you didn't believe this. And I also think you wouldn't be here if you thought it was all kind of working okay. And you thought we were kind of addressing these problems on the scale that we need to address them. And I think within this room and beyond it, there's a whole group of people who, if we get together and we think about the shape of the solution and we think about the shape of the scale, we can actually build something that does address this at the scale that we need to. Because at the end of the day, like, this is a pivotal moment. And it's not just a pivotal moment like for us in this room or even our country. It's a pivotal moment for like the whole project of democracy. It's a pivotal moment for this question of, can ordinary people come together and self-govern? Can they find common ground? Can they find facts that they agree on? That's the project that we have to kind of to focus on. And that's the moment that we're in. And so I want to get building this thing. And I hope all of you will join me, because I think this is the central thing that we need to work on. Thank you.
I'll pass around a hat. I think we can get the 100 million. I feel really good about it. Build some truths. Tell them. I love it. All right. Very excited about this next speaker. This next person coming to the stage knows how to throw a protest. For real. It is like, as National Warehouse Program Manager for Greenpeace and a member of the action team, she shows us what it means to, say, be in Alaska and take on the Shell exploration ship. Also, she's the co-founder and co-director of the Frailty Myths, an organization dismantling the impacts of patriarchy through hands-on skill-building workshops. Hell yes. Taking on the oil industry, dismantling patriarchy. More, please. Please welcome to the stage, Georgia Faye Hurstey!
Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for that introduction. So I am going to talk about Greenpeace, which I think probably most folks are familiar with. And Greenpeace was founded in 1971. And one of the things that hasn't changed at all is this idea and this commitment to the idea of direct action, that if we believe in something and we are working on issues, that we actually have to do something about it. And that nonviolent direct action is still the most powerful and effective tactic for change. Nonviolent direct action has a long and very profound history. Let's see if I can work this thing. And it goes across many, many movements, right? Greenpeace didn't invent direct action. For us, we specifically use direct action to expose problems and promote solutions to lead us to a green and peaceful future. And there's no one way to define an action. It can be any activity where people are standing up for what they believe in or speaking truth to power. But kind of more important than that for us is the personal journey that it takes people on that reaches into their deepest hopes for a better world. So each activist has to come to a place where they are willing to say for themselves that this is something that I care so much about that I'm willing to do this action and take whatever consequences come from it. And this is the most powerful part of the direct action. And this actually is the story that we should be telling. So how you define whether an action is effective obviously depends on what your objectives are. But kind of at a fundamental level, it's when your audience, whatever that is, stops what they're doing and pays a little bit of attention to what you're doing. And if that happens, then you can move into the possibility that that person or people would be able to be moved enough to be a participant in your story. That participation obviously can look countless ways, but at a base level, that audience member is moving from an observer to a participant. So what I want to talk today about is what it looks like and the impact of an organization taking a really big, deep breath, grounding our work in imagination, and starting to loosen our grip on the message box. How we've gone from this to this. We've learned that by letting go of the message box, when people have the space to be their whole nuanced, complex selves and tell their whole nuanced, complex, beautiful stories, that the impact is strikingly powerful. And that it actually speaks to the true diversity of experience that makes up our communities and the power that they hold. So let's talk about banners. This is going to be a fun slideshow. Greenpeace, for the last 50 years, around the world, has hung a whole lot of banners with just a whole lot of words, all kinds of words. I'm going to try to flip and talk. So in today's saturated and ever-rich data environment, actions that were once, really remarkable are now totally ignored. And while there's no blueprint for an action, we have learned that sometimes too many words is the same as having none at all, and that an image can speak volumes more than words could ever convey. So this led to thinking, what really happens inside of us when someone is moved or inspired enough to take an action? And it turns out there's a whole lot of different emotions that is going on. But what we found is that all of those emotions lead to hope. The idea, no matter how faint, that a better and more just world is imaginable is what we need to be communicating with our actions. Something I will never forget is, as a nonfiction reader, my English professor in a fiction class I was forced to take told me that the real power and importance of fiction is that it teaches us how to imagine. It teaches us how, and we have to practice it when we read. And in order to, we have to be able to imagine a better world in order for there to be hope. That hope doesn't exist without imagination. And this lesson applies to social change as well. As an example, a few years ago, a moment presented itself where we were able to manifest some of those learnings. So we were working on a campaign, I think that was mentioned, to prevent drilling in the Arctic. A ship was carrying a mission-critical piece of equipment. So Arctic drilling could not begin without this piece of equipment. The drilling rig was already in Alaska, and that ship ran aground and was getting emergency repairs in Portland. So that was good information to have. So the St. John's Bridge was in between the ship and the Arctic, and that was a choke point. The action would be an aerial blockade. Climbers would span the length of the bridge, camped out on ropes so the ship wouldn't be able to pass underneath. You can imagine, perhaps, that then the conversation came to whether or not we would have a banner, what would it say, how would people know, da-da-da. But we decided to not do that. We decided to not have a banner, but rather have a blockade that was effective, but also beautiful and captivating. We focused on designing an action that would stir people's imagination and curiosity, that was dynamic and colorful and nuanced like each of the activists involved, nuanced like the fight for climate justice. And we hoped that if we could capture people's imaginations, that the story of the fight for the Arctic would spread. So we were 13 climbers under the bridge, and after a very long, very cold night, we watched the sun rise behind the forest. And as the heat dried the dew and burned away the morning fog, people started to notice these little tents dangling from the St. John's Bridge 100 feet above the water. And then, later on in the day, one by one, each climber let go their streamer. And then suddenly it was red, and then yellow, and then red, and then yellow. These streamers pointing the vessel away from the Arctic and capturing the imagination of everyone. The waters below were filled with boats. The small dock was packed, and the park was filled with people. And unknown to me at the time, during the 40 hours we were hanging there, people all over were inspired to take action in a myriad of ways. It was incredible. These giant fluttering banners became these kinds of icons of resistance. They struck something inside of people's imagination that gave them hope. Hope that there was a possibility in the world that we might just win. And the story spread all across the globe. Rather than dry talking points, the activists, in very real time, talked to reporters about who we were as individuals, why we were there, what inspired us to fight for climate justice. We told stories that were important to us and that were important to our personal journeys, stories about police brutality and indigenous sovereignty, of impacted communities and our dying oceans, of protecting both the land of our ancestors, but also the land of our children. One of the things that we did in this particular action is that we pre-recorded activists to talk about their journeys, and then we were able to kind of slowly release those videos as the action was happening. So I'm going to show you the one that I did, which is kind of awkward to watch myself on a screen, but here it is. I consider myself an activist because of the word active, being an active participant in our community, our local communities, our greater global community is the responsibility and obligation of all of us. So I very much take that responsibility seriously. A lot of the issues of racism and sexism and the oppression of indigenous people and the degradation of the environment are all connected, and that we should be standing in solidarity. So I try to support that in the most, best way I can. Ultimately, the strength of a group of people who can be the change that they want to see, no matter how small, that accomplishes amazing things. I think what is so moving, I guess, and why I'm so inclined to stand against Shell is that Shell represents so much of the corporate dominance and greed and power that is unjustly held, controlling our governments, influencing our president. There's no way you can look at the details, look at the facts, and think that this is a good idea. And so really all I'm asking any of those people is to be reasonable and stop this horrific thing from continuing to go on. We have amazingly talented people working in the comms department and the video department at Greenpeace who made that video. So what we learned here is that when Greenpeace let go of the need to kind of fully control the story, fully control the narrative, it meant that the story could encompass so much more authenticity, more depth, more meaning. People felt like they could participate, like they were kind of invited to play with us, and despite the very technical nature of the action, it still felt really inclusive. And a few months later, Shell withdrew all of their plans to drill in the Arctic. And that was really a victory for everyone. So fast forward to last year, and we found ourselves in a very different situation. One where many of our communities were being targeted, and years of victories through struggle were being upended and just entirely erased. Many people felt desperate, helpless, attacked. There was no ship coming, there was no train to stop or tree to climb, but we wanted to do something. We wanted to invigorate our movements and also send a very clear and unmistakable message that we are powerful and that we will not be silenced by fear. So we chose one single word, and that was resist. But more important than the word we chose was that we painted it inside the rays of a brilliant and rising sun. While the activists were on the crane, I was lucky enough to walk through the streets, and I could actually hear people wonder, talking to themselves, imagining, telling each other what they were resisting or what they hoped someone else would resist, and how the banner and the people in the image made them feel inspired and hopeful, and that the commanding pulls of the bright yellows and deep reds against the gray DC sky, which was actually very blue that day, to be real, called us all to hope. And from the top of the crane, you can't see her in this photo, Nancy, who was on Facebook Live, told the entire world that this banner was a love note to the movement. And it really was. And Donald Trump could see it from the White House, so that was nice. Because the fight for the future is an interrelated one that calls on all of us to understand how racism and patriarchy and environmental degradation are invariably connected, we really must make more space and hear more voices. And if we want to bring about social change, we have to let go of the control of some of the messaging so that we can ignite imagination. Our tactics, our actions need to represent at the heart all of the people who are really at the heart of these struggles and lift up the diversity of experience, because this will necessarily create space for other people to paint themselves into the story, to fill in the blanks with their own truths and their own struggles, and imagine themselves in the future that we should all be demanding. And that is what engenders hope. And with hope, action, and with action, a more just and better world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Wait, I have a $1 million idea. So every time I see a Greenpeace action, I'm always amazed at the physicality of the actions. What if we were like, fuck CrossFit? What if like the way you people get in shape, like literally, I'm not even kidding, getting people in shape, you know, maybe just so you could like march longer, be in it, but like have like a workout plan.
It's a great idea.
For people to then like take it forward so you're in shape for your activism. We've had crafting. How do we take it? I'm into it.
I like it.
Am I even making sense?
We can do it at the warehouse.
But I feel like, yeah, right? Like I would be super motivated to go to the gym if I knew that like part of it was not climbing up some bullshit wall at a gym, but I was like, oh, you know what? I'm just gonna work my way to like hang from a fucking bridge with my message. I'm not wrong. Sometimes I'm wrong. I'm not wrong on this. So I'm just saying, CrossFit's a cult. We need a new workout plan. Come on, CrossFit is a cult. Those people are crazy. Like when your goal is vomiting into a can because you lifted too much, you're an idiot. Like I can't. More on that later. Oh boy. Guess what it's time for? The second Frank Prize interview. Okay. Second Frank Prize interview. It's very exciting. Second scientist who we're going to hear for 7 minutes in heaven. Second time I'm bringing out Troy and Annie. It's very exciting. Please welcome Troy and Annie. Good music.
Are you ready?
For the second 7 minutes in heaven with the scientist.
Round two.
All right, let's bring to the stage Hannah Shepard. How you doing?
Hi, I'm fine. How are you?
Great. Welcome to the stage.
Thank you.
So let's just jump in. You told us that your passion started in your childhood. So why don't we start there?
Okay, sure. So I grew up in a family with an ethos of public service, especially for people who had a lot of less privilege than we had. So my family members cared for the health of and taught and sort of defended other people. And growing up, I saw all of them really struggle very deeply with the limits of what they could do. And I was naive enough to think that if I just understood better the deep, complicated roots of inequality, that I could actually do something about it. So I married that naive thought with some serious nerdiness. I really love data, really love it. So the first time I got exposed to research in college, I was sort of hooked for life. So I'm a lot more circumspect right now about, what role research plays in social change, but I think there's still a role to play.
So how did that front row access to injustice and inequality shape the work that you do now?
Yeah, so as we all know, inequality is a very deep, complicated, thorny issue. It involves law and politics and economics, but it also involves the social norms of the groups and the organizations, the institutions that we're a part of. So what we think, what the people around us believe is acceptable and okay. And so, for example, like if the people around us accept or condone prejudice, we are more likely to accept it or at least not to stand up to it. So the the translation of my interest into social norms is really asking, how do we disrupt this process for norms that we don't want around? How do we, are there certain people in a group who we can identify to help us sort of disrupt this process, and how do we identify them?
So with those questions about inequality, how do you take your serious nerdiness, as you call it, and start to answer those questions?
So, so my colleagues and I were interested in whether we could change the culture of an organization using perceptions of social norms, and sort of employing particularly visible, influential people in a group to change these perceptions. And so we did that in the very messy, very complicated world of middle school. So we were interested in whether we could change middle school level patterns of peer harassment. So how much kids spread rumors about each other, or pick on each other, or call each other gay in disparaging ways. So that set of behaviors we were interested in targeting.
And so your methods in here are scientifically quite impressive. Can you talk about how you went into this messy world and were able to actually approach it from a scientific perspective?
Sure. So we had a really small but amazing team. We went into 56 middle schools, really different schools across the state of New Jersey, and we surveyed over 24,000 students. And from those surveys, we could build sort of social network maps of the patterns of interactions between students. And so what we did was half of the schools we randomized to receive this year-long grassroots intervention program that we designed. And within those schools, we randomly selected which kids would participate as the core group leading this intervention. So we called them the change makers. And what we were trying to do was get them to identify what were the issues that they wanted to see changed in their school, because the issues were different by different schools. And then how to get them to magnify the behaviors that we wanted them to model for other students. Using these social network maps, these patterns of interactions between all of the students, we could also identify who were the most visible, who were the most influential kids in each of these schools. And these are not sort of the typical popular or cool kids. These are kids who are informal leaders, both in positive and negative ways, but across lots of subgroups within a school.
And so if we can learn to change middle schoolers, we can learn to change a lot of different type of people. Within these studies, what are you finding that's going to help us make schools better, but of course everything else?
Yeah, so we were really excited about the outcome of this. So we estimated about 700 fewer peer harassment events across these 28 schools that received the year-long intervention program. And most importantly, the schools where there was a larger percentage of these visible, influential kids in that changemaker group, the program was more effective. And it's not like we needed a large percentage of these students to be part of the group in order for the intervention to work. Even having 20% of the changemaker group composed of these visible, influential kids made the program really effective.
Wow, so this was focused on middle schoolers. But what does that mean for the people in the room who want to focus on maybe working with influencers and social norms? How do they take those ideas and apply it to their work?
Yeah, so there's three kind of big takeaways for all of you. So the first is that changing perceptions of social norms is really key to changing the culture of behavior in a group. And this is sort of culture change happens at the local level. And we know that there are certain people in the group who are more able to influence what those perceptions are. So that's the first point. The second point is that using these influential people, and in particular sort of magnifying their behaviors that you want them to do, to represent, is a really effective way to create change. And again, these are not sort of the cool kids, the like celebrities. These are local informal leaders. And then the third point is that we can use the principles of social network mapping. We can use social network mapping and the principles, which is sort of about the set of relationships among people in a group to identify these key people. And we think these principles are very widely applicable way beyond middle schools.
So now that we all have these principles as our foundation, what should we start doing differently today that we may not have been doing before?
Yeah, so this is sort of a basic point and probably one that you all are very familiar with, but because this kind of behavior change happens at the local level, it's really important for change makers to have a really, really good understanding of local context, and in particular the social context. So that means sort of what are the set of relationships between people in a group, because that can help you, gives you a much better picture of what's going on in the group and how to actually identify the kind of people that you want to enlist in change efforts. Who is visible and who is influential within a group varies a lot by group. So there might be some kinds of change efforts where enlisting celebrities or people who are widely popular is useful, but there's a lot of kinds of behaviors that are really rooted in groups for whom these celebrities are not going to be the people that you want to enlist in change. So the idea is that sort of finding these people, using these people, really presents change makers with a big opportunity for different kinds of social change.
Great.
And so to end with our classic NPR-like question, Hannah, what's next?
Yeah. Thanks. So there's two sort of sets of projects that I'm developing from this work. So my colleagues and I are working on how to scale this kind of project. How do you find these influential people when you don't have the complete social network data that we have, when you don't go into middle schools and spend lots of time asking kids who they spend time with. So what are the heuristics that people can use to apply to lots of different groups to be able to actually find these people? And then the second set of projects I'm really excited about, I'm working with a sociologist, Adam Reich, on trying to apply the insights from this work to a different context, to the context of the workplace. And so what we're interested in is how we use social networks and these key influencers for helping low-wage workers build community and voice at work. So this is, formalizing what organizers know a lot about, but sort of using social science to formalize some of these principles.
Yes to that, right? Please. Well, thank you so much, Hannah Shepard, everybody. Thank you. Remember, write down your questions, and she will be able to take them tomorrow during the Frank Show.
Thank you. Everybody up, 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 up. I'm doing a dance party redo. Since they played some Baroque hoedown yesterday, we're gonna switch it. Maybe we're gonna get a little bit of disco music. Let's see, can we hear it? All right, that is disco music. So, as you dance, I'm gonna give you things to do. The first thing I'm gonna give you is lunchtime is here. Lunchtime is out and around outside, kind of in that little patio before you go downstairs into the Frank Lounge. That is where your lunch will be. We're gonna have to be back here at 2 p.m. sharp. What time? 2. Yes, and you want to be back here at 2 because our next speaker is not gonna be videotaped, and it's not because it's gonna be this really intimate thing. So you want to be back here at 2. Also, that's it. Food, dancing, 2 o'clock back here. Go eat.